Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about Trump's coronation and the Middle East ceasefire. Now, the real diplomacy begins. Our guest for the show is Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. Welcome to the show, Roopmati.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you for having me on your show. Always my pleasure.
The need of the hour is that the Israeli hostages should be returned, and that has to be completed. And the time has passed to settle for these half-hearted exchange deals. So what does this deal look like? And my first question to you is, what is this deal? What does it look like? Some Israelis don't like it at all. What do you think?
Jay, we have been following the terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas with a lot of heart throughout this period. And it's been a 15-month-long period that we have discussed this issue. And Jay, it's a war conflict in the Middle East which shows no sign of relent. And so this ceasefire that has been in the news, we have the first ceasefire. If you remember, the first ceasefire was in November 2023, and it lasted for just about 1 week. And in that period, we had 105 hostages which were returned by Hamas, particularly women, children, and elderly people who were ill. So the ratio at that time was 1:3. And you had Israel returning the prisoners. About 240 prisoners were returned back to Hamas. So the current ceasefire that we are seeing right now, it's being mediated by Qatar. So we have this ceasefire set to progress in 3 phases, Jay. And Qatar claims that this ceasefire was in its draft form for the past 13 months. So I don't think so. They would. It was in this form. It is absolutely. If it was in this form, it would have been accepted because Israel was always willing to take back. Calling on return of hostages was the first priority for Israel from day one. And so the claim that mediators have spent 411 days working on this draft is the one that we would take, not that it's been lying on the table for 13 months. So, Jay, in the first phase, which is to last about 6 weeks, we have first the ceasefire, stoppage of all fire, withdrawal of Israeli troops, a swap of hostages, 33 for 700 Palestinian prisoners. So we have an influx of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the U.S. hostages would be released first in this phase, as President Biden says. And so second and third phases are less developed at this stage, and they would be decided after this first stage is being implemented. So, Jay, this news of the ceasefire flashed on Trump's Twitter first, on his handle, on his news channel first, before it was an official U.S. and Israeli this. So that was a point which we saw Trump coming into mainstream politics before he has taken the president's chair, and he declaring that if the hostages were not released, he would destroy Hamas. So now that was a threat that he made on the table. But what is happening beyond that is different, Jay, because when you see this ceasefire being announced, you see Hamas not going into a shell, but in fact coming out more aggressively. They have this aggressive streak even in their most lowest phase, and that is what is scary for Israel, because we are sitting miles and millions of miles away. They are right at their doorstep, Jay. And the proximity of these terrorists to Israel is very dangerous, because this aggressiveness, this adrenaline pump that they get through these ceasefires, when their morale is down and they try to come up, so that is when it's most dangerous for Israel, because they strike by suicide bombers, they strike by not by overt means, but by covert means. So we have this enemy that Israel faces on a 24/7 basis. They have no respite from these people. And Israel is giving this a chance, first, to get the hostages. Second, because it has literally destroyed the leadership of the Hamas and the Hezbollah. So they are trying to get as many hostages in as they can, but getting back to normalcy through this ceasefire, which is the aim of the ceasefire, seems to be a long way across because, see, they want the Israeli troops to withdraw from the population centers during the first phase and just, but Israel's IDF said that they would keep their control over the Gaza Egypt border known as the Philadelphia corridor. So they would not leave that. And Israel also wants to maintain a buffer zone inside the Gaza Strip in the border with Israel. So that's a necessity. And the size of this buffer zone was one of the points on which these negotiations were stalling. And Jay, we have to understand that this buffer zone has to be to the maximum because it's at the doorstep of Israel. And this was the main place from which they had the October 7 attacks, terrorist attacks on Israel. So that cannot be negotiable. And IDF standing its ground is a good thing for protecting its civilians, Jay. And also, this deal wants Palestinians to return back to their homes in Gaza, including the north. Now it's completely devastated, but they want them to return to the north. Massive influx of humanitarian aid is expected in the places which they were showing, as you remember, starvation and dire humanitarian needs were not being met. So massive humanitarian aid will flow in, and Gaza's wounded will be allowed to leave to receive treatment for the medical reasons. So Jay, you have just this exchange of female soldiers, children, elderly, and sick. What about the men who are still detained as hostages? And you remember it was a very tense day on the first day of the ceasefire. They were refusing to send the names, and Netanyahu said that he would call off the ceasefire if the names were not released and if the hostages were not released immediately. So three were released, and during the sixth day, uh, Hamas will release these three hostages every 7 days, and on the sixth day, Hamas will on the sixth installment, Hamas would release all the remaining detainees, and Israel will release around 1,000 Palestine prisoners, which they are taken 1,000. So October 8th, who are arrested and who are not involved directly in the terrorist attack. So Jay, you see, there is a lot of um, disparity when Hamas says they only have 94 hostages, out of which 34 are already dead, and 84 from Israel, 8 from Thailand, 1 from Nepal, 1 from Tanzania. That's it. That's the one. And they say that Israel holds 10,000 Palestinian prisoners. So they want that to come to a balancing act. And so, Jay, Biden has said that the second phase would begin after the exchange of these hostages would be over, including the living hostages and the male soldiers. Israel forces would completely withdraw from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire would become a permanent ceasefire. And then you come down to the final stage in which any remains of the hostages who are killed would be returned, and a major reconstruction of the Gaza Strip would begin. So this isn't just the ceasefire deal.
Well, who's going to do that reconstruction?
Yeah, that's what. That's what. And for what? For what? What is the main aim to get this reconstruction? To get them, allow them to come back. So it's a very dicey situation that they have put everybody into. And US, Egypt, and Qatar have jointly put up a mechanism to ensure the implementation during the first 42 days. So we're going to have a tense month and a half.
Well, a lot of Israelis don't like to deal. And I mean, I don't know exactly how many reasons they have for not liking the deal, but one of them seems to be the ratio of release. It's really incredible that for a relatively small number of hostages, there are so many Hamas prisoners being released. I'm not sure I understand that, or that that's justifiable. The other thing is that the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, are celebrating, and they're making statements to the media to the effect that they won, they came out better.
Yes.
which may or may
Yes.
not be true, but that's their view of it. And so that brings us to the question of Trump's involvement. Now, you know that private citizens, and Trump, until the inauguration, was a private citizen, are prohibited by law, the Logan Act, from participating in negotiations with foreign countries. And he was heavily involved in this negotiation. He had his emissary, his envoy over there, involved in the discussions, and he was making public statements about what he was going to do if um, if Hamas did not reach a settlement with Israel, and if Israel, did not reach a settlement with Hamas, I suppose. But can you talk about his involvement and whether he really is entitled to credit for having brought this settlement, to fruition?
Jay, he calls himself as the greatest friend Israel has ever had. So that's what he proclaims himself to be. But in one of our programs, you remember we had discussed Biden's credentials in protecting Israel. He has been an envoy who has visited Middle East for the past 5 decades. He has got experience over this foreign policy issue, and he did the best to protect Israel in the sense that immediately there were these U.S. fighters coming inside. The every ammunition was put into place, and that deterred Iran to come into this attack directly in the beginning, because that would have put Israel on a back foot and changed things a lot. So the protection that we got through Biden for Israel was the reason why Israel could eliminate these top forces of Hezbollah and Hamas, Yemen, Syria. All these places are very, very important, Jay, because they were striking points for into Israel, and the proximity that Israel has to these forces is what is dangerous. And Trump has opened the embassy in Jerusalem, US embassy. That is far different from coming into war. Declaring that you would, um, what do you say, exterminate them completely if the hostages were not returned is different from the ground reality. How you attack, how you implement the ground is very different from what you have war cries and, what happens on the front is two different things, Jay. So for him, it is lack of experience in warfare, because he claims to be the only president in whose term there has been no war. So he doesn't have experience of war and how to deal with it. And Jay, we have seen Hamas is a hidden enemy, and when they regroup, they are like rats. They regroup, they replenish, and they re-attack because they have no fear of life. Every country, every democratic country, every president of the United States, Biden, Trump, whoever, they're trying to protect lives. They're trying to protect the hostages. The third phase talks about bringing back the remains of the deceased. So that is respect to human life. For the enemy, for Hamas, there is no respect for human life. We are fighting an enemy with no morals. We are fighting an enemy with no boundaries. They want to blow themselves up along with others. So that becomes a very asymmetrical balance of combat.
What about this step transaction here? Will it hold? What do we know about the likelihood of it holding, and for how long, based historically and based on the statements that have been made? What do you think?
Jay, these steps one are not going to be followed, because when they proclaim only 94 hostages, it becomes very. It is not true. We know they are in plus 400, maybe more. We don't know the number actually taken, actually killed. So they are negotiating with these, and you've seen how they release the hostages. It is brutal. It is inhuman. You don't know how they must be keeping the hostages, what they must be doing to the hostages behind. When we saw the first images of Hamas with Israeli citizens, it was barbaric. The term that can be put in, it was barbaric. You don't know. They have no negotiating standards, and for Qatar and all these people to say that. See, he started on a sour note, saying that this was already the draft for 13 months. And so Israel is at fault for not choosing it. And we know Benjamin Netanyahu is in coalition politics. He doesn't have a clear majority. So he has to also negotiate the domestic pressures to keep this ceasefire going. You have his minister resigning because he doesn't agree with this ceasefire. So there is a lot of nitty gritties to this ceasefire, Jay.
Some personalities for a moment, because Trump is all about personalities in his appointments. So he appointed Elisa Stefanik to be the UN representative to the UN, which is very interesting. And Elise Stefanik, no sooner did Trump get inaugurated than she made a statement that that the that the that Israel is entitled, as a matter of biblical priority, to the West Bank, and that the United States will support the IDF in taking complete control of the West Bank. That is really different than what Joe
Hmm,
Biden was doing, and
hmm.
different than many countries and authorities in the world. The other thing that I find interesting is that Mike Huckabee, who is mm, what do you want to say, a strong Christian nationalist, a born again, has been appointed the ambassador to Israel. So those two personalities show that Trump will have a lot of control over what happens on this issue in the United Nations, at least as far as the United States is concerned, and in Israel, as far as the American ambassador is concerned. What makes him do this? Is this all part of his demagoguery, where he wants to support the Christian nationalists in his base? He is certainly taking very mm, aggressive steps here to support the IDF, to support Netanyahu, and to support Israel. Now, I wouldn't argue with that as a mission, but it seems to me that's really not Trump. That's Trump political. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Jay, Ellie Stefanik's claim that the West Bank has Israel has a biblical right, because in Trump's first term we saw that there was a surge in settlements, removing a 4-decade U.S. policy that expansion into the West Bank was illegal. So, but upon taking this office, Jay, Trump has cancelled the Biden era sanctions on far right Israeli settler groups and individuals accused of violence against Palestinians. So, this Jay, when they talk about this, that you remember in a 2017 interview for CNN, Huckabee had argued that the Palestine territory did not exist at all. So they are that kind of extreme end of the spectrum where he had said that there is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. So he's using the biblical names. So you have something that, you know, he's making there's no, what do you say, concealing of what he wants to do. He wants to get into this with maximum force. And Stefanik from the UN, who would announce such things, Jay, remember that the US contributes maximum of the UN budget. And in one of his presidential orders, like we've seen how he's with, oh, if you pressurize him too much, he will withdraw from the UN. So he's got nothing to fear. He's that power monger who will do as he wants. And I think Hamas and Gaza should be scared of him because he is um, on exactly the same level of adrenaline as them.
That's very interesting, the way you put that, and it does make a lot of sense. He's unpredictable, and he's
Yes.
capable of doing remarkable, disruptive, violent things. So, we were talking about this before, Roopmati, and the conclusion I think we came to is that creating a settlement like this is really over Trump's head, and that he isn't going to be able to do a good job. But at least now, riding on Biden's coattails, there is a settlement, at least for the moment, and it seems to be by, a agreement among the parties, or at least the ones who negotiated in Qatar. But the conclusion we came to before was that that wasn't the end of it. That it would break down, and
Mm.
other things would happen. After all, this is the Middle East, and
Yes.
the question then is whether Trump is up to that, because now it's on him. So the question, is already arising. With the West Bank, there has been violence ever since the inauguration, if not a day or two before, in anticipation of it. And there have been a number of killings, a number of terror attacks in the West Bank, and it's violence there. And the
Mm.
question is, uh, what will Trump do on that? Um, he said he was going to force a settlement of between the Israelis and Hamas. What's he going to do in the West Bank? Because now this is going to have other implications. It's not a smoldering fire; it's an open fire, and there's mm, a lot of violence and killing going on there. Your
Mm.
thoughts about the West Bank now?
Yeah, Jay, these settlements he's supporting. All these points of these regions in Israel, which have been controversial, they have had this that it's Israeli settlements and Palestine displacements, and this narrative that has been going on in news channels and media, Jay. But you see, you analyze through everything that the Gaza Strip, the key was given to them to rebuild, to thrive, to prosper, to everything. They used every and each bit of money to build a tunnel of terror. They used the UNRWA for funds to fund the terrorists. Every penny that was put into development and rejuvenation of these Palestinian interests in Gaza Strip were put to ashes because they didn't use it anything for the development. They used civilians as shields. So that has been the narrative that is set, and that has been the support that they have got from their own people. See, their own people is a big term for them because these civilians stand in front of their forces when they come to attack Israel. These people stand in front of, they resist Israelis in Israel. So that kind of, they have this terror spreading mechanism in them, Jay, that we cater to. We actually have to negotiate, and we have to justify why we have to go and have Israelis settle into Israel. They want Israel out of Israel. That is the plain sentence, that they don't want Israel to be there. And if you're not going to be there, they're not going to ask you to leave. They're going to destroy you in West Bank, in Gaza, in every place that we talk about. They want to just eliminate Israel. So that becomes a very, very dangerous situation to live in, Jay.
I was listening to National Public Radio a couple of days ago, and they were interviewing, and I didn't feel it was balanced at all. I was not happy with the way NPR covered the story, but they were talking to a bunch of young people in this country who support the Palestinians and who oppose Israel. And that's been happening actually since October 7th. Um, how do you think that? And they were talking about a movement, right? They were talking about a
Mm.
movement where ultimately there would be a two-state solution, and where Israel would have its wings clipped or worse. They really were hostile toward Israel in every way,
Mm.
and they were supportive of the Palestinians and Hamas for that matter, and the terrorists in every way. These are
Mm.
American kids. We saw it on the college campuses, and we still see it on the college campuses, actually. There's a certain level of anti Semitism involved. So now Trump is saying, I'm going to support Israel. And if that requires weapons and other support, I will provide. And I will make sure that, the biblical initiative here about the West Bank is realized. So my question to you is, how does that affect the movement in this country among the students and other, quote, progressives, end quote, who feel that Israel ought to lose, that Palestinians ought to win, Hamas should, reconstitute itself, and that's the way that the matter should be resolved, and very, very hostile about Israel, and very determined, and a lot of them. How does what is going on affect that?
CJ, being anti-Semitic and being anti-Israel came into fashion from October 7th. It was funded very well by billionaires like George Soros. They were putting it into every. It was like going to a picnic on the college campus. You want to go and support Palestine. You don't know what is Palestine. You don't know what is Israel. Israel has existed far before Islam was born, before the religion was born. So there is something known as history, there's something known as chronology, there's something as progressiveness. If you talk about two-state solution, the Gaza Strip was made to function like a proper self-sufficient unit. What happened? Nothing. Can you imagine two states being there and fighting each other every day? So they could not move above the experiment of a Gaza Strip. They used every fund which was coming in from all corners of the world, from the UN, from Canada, from anywhere, to put into anti-Israel activities. Jay, and you have these countries, the axis of resistance that you have always talked about, who supported these forces. And how are these forces? They are like, you need a spark to start a fire. They are like this. You need just a little bit of rejuvenation for them to regroup again. And when they regroup, they don't look inwards to their development. They look towards how they can again go and attack Israel. For them, it is a mental problem, Jay. There is no other. The blissful goal of life is to reach the heavens. So we don't know what to do with them. And if they reach heaven trying to destroy Israel, they'll get heaven faster. So we have a very big problem, which can. Sometimes it is that if you remember that you give one slap and you try to give the other cheek so that the other person will feel guilty and conscience and not slap you back. An eye for an eye will make the world blind, but sometimes you need to have violence which cuts violence, and you need their own medicine, them to taste their own medicine before they understand what they are making other people go through.
Well,
3,500 people killed morning, but they talk about the 46,000 people who are killed. They talk about when they were starving for food. They compared themselves to Somalia. Genocide. What about you coming into civilian homes on October 7th? That has to be explained and supported by every student. So that doesn't happen.
the question I have, which I have had for the past several weeks, is can Trump handle this? Does he have any experience or any common sense to handle the Middle East? And the things that he's doing right now, they do suggest that he's being really roughshod about things. And the question is whether we will wind up with a war, because although he is good at bullying people, it's not clear that he is good at making peace. It's not clear that he knows how to handle diplomatic relations. We've seen him, undermine our relationships with Western Europe, with the EU, with NATO, with every country you can think of over there. He's been completely disruptive. Name a country. Now he's withdrawn from the WHO, which could lead to a pandemic, which probably will lead to a pandemic. And he's doing terrible things with migrants on the border. We'll see that play out in the next few days. He claims to have the power to terminate birthright citizenship, even though it's very clear in the Constitution that there is birthright citizenship. He's caused his friends in Congress to submit a voting suppression bill requiring original proof of citizenship, which is going to be very disruptive in the next election. They were already planning for the midterms, the Republicans. He's issued 1,500 pardons to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and their friends about January 6th. He's said he's going to start the tariff war at 25% February 1st against our friends, Canada, Mexico. And, my conclusion about all this is that he's looking for disruption. He's looking for lots of litigation. The ACLU has already sued him on the birthright citizenship, and there are other lawsuits that were filed already. And he plans other executive orders. So, while Trump can say he's going to bring peace and the rule of law, which just those are not true statements at all. The fact is that he is doing things that are so disruptive that they will lead to, disruption and confusion and upsetting the apple cart, not only in this country but in the world, and especially in the Middle East because it's already violent right now. To say nothing of Ukraine. So my question is, how close are we with all this intentional disruption to a war in the Middle East, the continuation or the horrible settlement of the war in Ukraine to give away, large parts of Ukraine? How far are we from fragmenting Europe so that NATO is no longer effective? How far are we from having global pandemics? Under this man, disruption is the name of the game. So, what do you think about the possibility of war and disruption, given what we know all in the past day?
Jay, in a day, he signed orders which have ranged from every part that America has a role to play in. And by doing so, Jay, one big thing also that he has done, he's put climate change on a accelerator, because we have now gone into energy drilling. The green electricity thing is gone out of the doors. There will be more manufacturing units. Alaska will be tapped for resources. So all these moves will make the American economy strong, but for a short period of time. You'll have influx of money, everything, but it's not a long-term policy that he's looking at. He is just concentrating on his 4 years that he gets enough money to sustain or revive the economy, or just to pump in money and make things cheaper. When you put tariffs, you do get revenue. So none of his policies are long term if you go to see. And the pandemic that can happen and we are out of it, so that will be a downward spiral. When the pandemic happens, you need to rely on each other, and that's what happened during COVID. And when you're out of the WHO, God knows what regulations does he want to bring in. And Ukraine, he's going to cede to Russia. He had promised that he'll end the war within one day. That was his promise. And let's see now, after 24 hours, what will happen, what will be the verdict on Ukraine Russia war. And Jay, for Israel, he's put in such hardliners, but we have a very good thing in Israel, that Israel has a self-defense policy which is irrespective of anybody. So they keep self-defense at its top priority. And so what happens from America is a bonus. But if it comes to defending themselves, they will be self-sufficient. So, they will want America as an ally. That is it. But they will not fall into the trap of this deal, which causes Gaza to be rebuilt and reconstructed, and the ceasefire becoming a permanent ceasefire. Because we know Hamas doesn't do this permanent stuff. And Trump, how far he will control this Middle East conflict is a very far-fetched possibility, because he has his hands stuck in so many zones. Jay, now this is something which is spanning a million departments and so many issues. When we talk about it, it's difficult to bring them into a context or a locus that we can talk about. It's just everywhere, and he wants to do everything at one time. That is not possible, Jay.
Well, wow. Yeah, that is a very important point to leave this with. He can't do it all at the same time. So many issues. and this it's going to break down. Even if you agree with some or many of his positions, it can't be sustainable. And so we'll have to follow it every single week, Roopmati. And I fear that it's going to get worse, not better. Anyway,
Mm.
thank you so much, Roopmati Khandekar, our geopolitical analyst. We'll be back next week with more. This is ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Aloha.
Hello, Ajay. Thank you very much for having me.